the beginning of the 20th century, child labor was rampant in the United States. Some children worked 19-hour days with 1 hour of break. These children also experienced extremely poor working conditions, were exposed to dangerous machinery, and received cruel punishments for minor mistakes. Although laws were passed in the late 19th century to protect working children and outlaw child labor, these laws were disregarded and unenforced in many American factories. In response to these abuses, crusaders arose to fight on behalf of children exploited by these circumstances. One such hero was Lewis Hine. Lewis Wicks Hine was born on September 26, 1874, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, to Douglas Hull and Sarah Hine. Hine's father died when he was 18. Lewis worked in various jobs, including a clothing store, water filter company, and bank, to support his family, before starting college at the University of Chicago in 1900. He moved to New York in 1901 to attend New York University, while teaching at the Ethical Culture School. Lewis Hine discovered an interest in photography while working at the Ethical Culture School, photographing school events and using the camera as a teaching tool. He married in 1904, and in that same year began his first series of documentary photographs. This series was about immigrants moving through Ellis Island. Frank Manny, Hine's friend and colleague, supported him and told him to portray the newly arrived with the same dignity and respect as those immigrants who landed at Plymouth Rock. Hine graduated from New York University in 1905 and continued to work at the Ethical Culture School. In 1906, he began doing freelance photography work for the National Child Labor Committee. The National Child Labor Committee was founded in 1904 with the aim of promoting the rights, awareness, dignity, well-being, and education of children and youth as they relate to work and working. Lewis Hine's self-stated aim was similar: to show the things that had to be corrected in the nation's workforce and factories. It is no surprise that the committee hired him full-time in 1908. Lewis Hine's new job was as the official photographer of the NCLC. He would keep this job for about a decade while working on a degree from Columbia University in sociology. This was the first time Hine had received a monthly salary for photography, and he was determined to use photography to change the nation for the better. He traveled throughout the country, photographing child laborers in canneries, factories, mines, textile mills, agricultural industries, and street trade. He traveled 12,000 miles in 1 year on his crusade. Hine was clearly shaken by some of his visits to such mills as the Bib Mill in Macon, Georgia. As he said in the caption of one of his photos, some boys and girls were so small they had to climb up onto the spinning frame to mend broken threads and put back the empty bobbins. During his travels throughout America, Hine discovered many children far too young to work who, as he quoted in a caption, had just happened in or were helping sister. This was a common lie told by children who needed to work to survive, although, even under the abusive standards of the time, they were too young. Lewis Hine also photographed young newsies, or children selling newspapers on the street. Many of these children came from Washington, D.C. Hine's caption for this photograph of a young child selling newspapers on the street was, "Michael McNeilis, age 8, a newsboy. This boy has just recovered from his second attack of pneumonia. Was found selling papers in a big rainstorm." Hine traveled along the Mississippi River and the East Coast, photographing young seafood workers. This picture shows a typical canning factory. The oyster shuckers worked from 3:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. This little girl works in the factory as well, helping her mother. This young boy, age 5, is in his second year of work. He does not understand English. Children were given knives to chop sardines, but the fish and utensils were slippery, so accidents were frequent. As one young boy said, "The salt water gets into the cuts and they ache." The children had to suffer these injuries without any medical aid. Sometimes Hine had to sneak into factories because the managers didn't want their crimes against children to be discovered or published. He adopted many disguises, including those of a tramp, a peddler, a Bible salesman, and a postcard vendor. Once he was inside these closed factories, Hine secretly took photographs of children and jotted down their names and vital statistics in a small, hidden notebook. He knew the distance from each of the buttons on his vest to the floor and used this to measure the height of young children for his research. Hine sometimes pretended to be an industrial photographer and asked children to step into the photos he took of machines, telling the factory managers the children were there to give it a sense of scale. Sometimes Hine was unable to gain entrance to certain factories. If he couldn't get in, he would talk to the children at their homes in the early morning before their workday began. Hine worked for the NCLC until 1917, when he took a job with the Red Cross and went to Europe to take documentary photographs. Others continued his work at the National Child Labor Committee, although none quite so famous. Throughout the next 20 years, Hine continued his sociological photography, as he liked to call it. In 1924, Congress attempted to amend the Constitution to outlaw child labor, but the bill did not pass and had to be dropped. Ironically, it took a depression to end child labor for good, the Great Depression. When America's economy dropped to rock bottom, adults with families to feed and no money were forced to take jobs for the lower wages paid to children. These adults soon outnumbered the children in the work market, and child labor was finished. Hine's work came to final fruition in 1938, when the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's tenure. The Fair Labor Standards Act states that 16 years is the minimum age for children to begin working in any occupation other than agriculture. The passage of this law was a triumph for Hine and his former employers, the National Child Labor Committee. Lewis Hine died on November 3, 1940. He will be remembered forever for taking a stand to prevent child labor in the United States. In the words of this sage photographer, "Light was required in our country, light in floods."